Spurg here to welcome you to the first episode of Highside, Lowside, Season 3. Now, a lot's happened in the world since we've last sat on these couches together, and we've had a few new developments at RevZilla as well. Like many of you all, we've gotten a lot more comfortable talking to our friends via screens. And while it sucks that we'll be moving beyond the couch, something that Lemmy used to pick on me for saying, a format change not only allows us to adhere to COVID restrictions, but it also allows us to welcome some new faces to the show in a more regular cadence. So as we begin our plan for Season 3, it made sense to include our new teammate, Zack as my new co-host for the show. Now, don't worry. For all you Bearded Joe fans out there, Mr. Zito will still regularly be stopping by. But we're also going to be hosting other RevZilla favorites, folks like Ari Henning and Lance Oliver, along with new faces in the world of motorcycling. Now, the one final note here. Whether this is your first episode with us or you've been along for the ride since the beginning, I want to take a second and say thank you. Thank you for being part of our Highside, Lowside community. It's folks like yourself that has made this program such a success. So without further ado, sit back and enjoy episode 1 of Season 3, where Lance Oliver joins Zack and myself as we discuss the question, can motorcycles be too cheap? All right, I am Spurgeon, and this is my new co-host,
Zack. This is where I start talking.
Yeah, this is where you just say your
everybody.
name to establish the voice, yeah.
God, I'm so good at this already. Welcome, everybody, to Highside, Lowside, Season 3.
It's race.
That's right, yeah.
So, as you can tell, things are a little bit different this year. We have the couch behind us as a decorative piece, but we are, amidst a global pandemic, the same as everybody else. And frankly, we now have a whole team on the West Coast that we want to incorporate, such as Mr. Zack Quartz, Ari Henning, Spencer Roberts. I always add an S on the end. Spencer Robert.
I know.
But yeah, so this is how Highside, Lowside is going to look for Season 3.
It's very exciting. I mean, it's terrible in all the same ways that COVID-19 is terrible for everyone. But we figured we'd make the best of it and buckle down and talk to each other and do the same thing everyone else is doing, which is sit alone at the office as Verge is doing, or in your wife's office like I'm doing, and talk about bikes, and hopefully it's entertaining for everybody.
Well, I would say, unless you're watching this on YouTube, which a lot of you do, for those of you that are listening on the podcast version, we're going to hopefully sound the same. We've got these high quality microphones. We're all still talking into them and recording them the same way. So hopefully, if you're listening to this on the podcast version, you don't have any difference in experience. And I would say if you're not familiar with that, you can always just type in RevZilla to wherever you get your podcasts, and you can actually just stream along to all of Season 1, Season 2, and then follow along with Season 3.
And that way you don't have to look at our faces, which is arguably a big benefit.
Yeah, especially with this COVID look that we all have going on now. So, yeah.
Yes, indeedy. So, what have you been up to lately, Spurge? I actually haven't talked to you in a few days since.
I mean, you were gone last week shooting, and while you were gone out shooting another episode of CTXP, I did a dual sport ride over the weekend. It was the Seven Mountains dual sport. So we went up Friday.
You did.
Yeah, we went up Friday and rode Friday and then all day Saturday. Now, here's what's really interesting is I am currently testing a brand new cone valve pro component suspension from WP on my KTM 350, purely for scientific purposes. But it's a game-changing suspension. If you think that you're an okay rider, it then takes you and makes you completely fearless. I feel like their motto should be like KTM, or WP Pro Components. Choosing the correct line no longer matters, because you just whatever line you take, the bike just goes right over top of it. So
I guess that's how I feel about riding modern dirt bikes in general. I've spent so much time on riding adventure bikes off-road, or riding old bikes or street bikes, or just the wrong tool for the job. And then I actually get on a real dirt bike and I ride across, I'm riding down a trail and I see a section of roots or rocks coming, and I'm like, oh no, I'm going to die. And the bike just goes, no, this is fine. And
well, especially if you go from riding a modern adventure bike to riding a dirt bike, there's so many hits on an adventure bike. You're like, oh, here it comes. And then when you switch to a dirt bike, you're like, oh, here it comes. And it just boop.
Here's my question. Do you, Spurgeon Dunbar, need upgraded suspension on your dirt bike? Why not just sort of tough it out and learn from the bad suspension, become a better rider, so that Do you just sort of like fix all of your problems with new components?
I've got so much money that like I'm not gonna waste my time riding stock suspension parts. I'm going to go to the best. No, so that's actually really good. That's actually a really good question. I think anyone, that buys a new motorcycle in general, I mean, especially on the dirt segment, should at least bare minimum upgrade the springs, right? Like get the springs to match your rider weight because it does make a huge difference.
That's fair.
And my suspension, my stock suspension, I modified with a different damping setup and then the correct springs. And that's already a really great upgrade in its own right. You don't have to go to Pro Components. The argument that I would say for, getting that crazy suspension upgrade is a lot of everybody. What'd you say?
Buckle up, everybody.
Is that I do think I think WP does a disservice to themselves by calling it Pro Components because they actually make the bike so much easier to ride for people that are not professional riders. So it should be like
for idiots.
Yeah, it should be WP like rider suspension is what it should be called because it would make it that much easier for guys like myself to go out and actually look like a professional.
Totally fair. Well, the whole should you upgrade your suspension, arguably a whole nother podcast. So we should probably focus on.
It's going to be. I'm doing it for an article. Like I said, it's for science. So that's my whole thing. But we can do a podcast on that. So for yourself, we just got CTXP, the Ducati episode on release. What is it that you were filming next week? So we just got you were out filming episode 3. Give us a teaser. What can we expect?
Sure. Well, my first teaser I can give you is that I noticed when I logged into Squadcast here to do this podcast that Squadcast thinks I'm in Pismo Beach, California for some reason. And actually, the reason is that we filmed in Pismo Beach for episode 3, which is world's fastest pizza delivery bikes. That's the idea. So 2 high horsepower bikes and outfitted to deliver food and then head to head versus an experienced delivery driver in a cage
and what was he driving?
He was in an all-electric Chevy Bolt, actually.
Man, who wins that one?
You'll just have to tune in to find out. It was fun. It was a fun episode, and I hope everyone enjoys it when it comes out. And I hope that Squadcast eventually knows that I'm in Los Angeles and not in Pismo Beach anymore.
Was the pizza delivered hot and fresh?
Well, again, you're going to have to tune in to find out. But all I can say is I did my best.
That's all we can ever ask of you. It's a low bar.
It is. It's all I ever do, and it only sometimes works out. For the sake of moving this along, we should say that neither Pro Components on KTM dirt bikes nor pizza delivery bikes is the actual topic of today's podcast. Today we're asking the question. Is there such a thing as a motorcycle that's too cheap? Can motorcycles be too cheap? Is that even a thing that's possible? And in order to do that, we're bringing in our I would say resident cheapskate, but he's really not. But
we can
Silver
call
Fox,
him that.
I believe you call him the Silver Fox. Do you not? Lance Oliver of Common Tread fame is going to come in and talk to us about cheap bikes, and I'm excited.
So while we work to get Lance hooked up here, just keep in mind that you can subscribe to the podcast so that you always are up with all the episodes. And we're actually, in addition to being able to shoot us an email at Highside, Lowside at RevZilla.com, you can always leave a review for us at Apple iTunes, and it actually really helps with the podcast component of this and to incentivize you out there in the audience to leave us reviews, favorable or not. We're not telling you it has to be a glowing review, even though it should, because we're the best. All you have to do is leave us a review on Apple iTunes, and then we are randomly going to pick a review every episode to give out free t-shirts. And we are having some special edition Highside, Lowside t-shirts made up. We've got RevZilla t-shirts, so we're going to send you a free t-shirt. And this week's winner, I'm going to do my little newscaster smacking the paper thing, is going to be Derek Brown. So Derek Brown, if you are paying attention to this episode, or if you are a friend of Derek Brown, let him know that he won. All you need to do is send us an email to highsidelowside at RevZilla.com, and you, sir, will get yourself a brand new free t-shirt.
Our all cotton sacrifice to the god of podcasts, Steve Jobs. Please, Derek, take our gift on behalf of Mr. Jobs and all he has done for podcasting. And if you don't claim your t-shirt, of course, it ends up as a rag on the shop manual. It ends up as a rag in Area Henning's shop and will just end up soaking up oil for the rest of its life, which is a fine task to be sure, but not as good as covering your back and promoting our show. So please do claim your t-shirt.
All right. So without any further ado, let's move on and let's get Lance Oliver on the horn.
Lancey Pants, bring him in.
So here we are with Lance Silver Fox Oliver, a resident cheapskate, to talk about not spending money on motorcycles.
Well, there's nobody who's got a better track record of being a cheapskate with motorcycles than me. I have a lifetime of motorcycling for far less than what most people have put into one good Ducati.
That's arguably. I'm going to say this. This is going to be my tagline of this whole podcast. Is that could be a podcast by itself, which I feel like it could be. I will say, my colleague on the West Coast here, Spencer Robert, would probably challenge you for resident cheapskate. I think he's got a long way to go. He's the new guy. You're the veteran. So I don't think that he has the honor just yet. But I just want to let you know he's coming for you. He feels that he is a cheapskate.
It's good to know that someone's out there is poised to carry on the legacy. That's
So Lance, you just bought a new motorcycle, and this is the first time that you've bought a bike in like 10 years?
Yeah, 10 years. It was the longest I've ever gone without buying or selling a motorcycle. I went basically 10 years with the same lineup in the garage, which is just unheard of. But,
and then what did you sell and what did you get?
Well, as well documented on Common Tread, I sold my 90,000 mile Kawasaki Versys to your Uncle Bob, and
he did. And
it's not a joke. That's literally
Uncle Bob actually would give Lance Oliver a run for his money on being the cheapskate
yes,
group.
That's
because
true.
Bob came to me. He's like, "Hey, I'm looking to buy a new motorcycle," and Uncle Bob was the one that gave me a first ride in the back of an old '86 Kawasaki KLR, and he goes, "I don't want to spend over $1,000." And I was like, okay. And then Lance came to me. He's like, hey, I got like 90,000 miles in this Versys 650. I'm trying to get rid of it. Do you know anybody that would like give me $1,000 for this? And I was like, yeah,
it's fate.
I do.
It's brilliant. And so everyone was happy.
Yeah.
It seems like. But
so far,
Lance.
yeah. So anyway, so carry on, Lance. So you sold your Versys 650 to Uncle Bob, and there is an article on that on Common Tread.
And then I dithered for a full year almost until I actually replaced it by buying a used 2014 Honda VFR 800 Interceptor, which is, who knows, might last me the next 10.
Did you get the souped up version with the adjustable suspension?
Yeah, it's a deluxe, so it's got the very rudimentary traction control, ABS, center stand, heated grips.
I don't know if the audience caught it, but as soon as Lance said deluxe, Zack goes, "Oh." It was barely audible. It was good.
That's because my hair is grayer in my own mind than it is in real life. And anytime someone says they got a deluxe sport touring bike and they start saying things like center stand and heated grips, I start saying, "Oof, boy, that sounds awful nice."
Yeah, I mean, when they came out with that bike, they made the regular version and the deluxe, and you get all that extra stuff on the deluxe, and it was only like $1,000 or so more, so it seemed like a no-brainer. But they're hard to find. I had to search far and wide to find a deluxe model as opposed to the standard.
How long did Honda make that version for? Only like 3 years? 2 years?
Well, it was only sold in the States for 3 years. It still continued to be sold in Europe, where it was more popular. It was kind of a sales flop here, just largely because it was priced so high. But then after that 3-year run, there were lots of leftovers around, and actually I could have bought the bike cheaper a couple years ago. I found I could have bought a new leftover a couple years ago cheaper than what I paid this year for the used one. But
and you call yourself a cheapskate?
I know. I really failed on that. I really failed. That was
you waited too long.
But that's actually a good segue into the topic of today's podcast.
Yes.
Which is, can motorcycles be too cheap? And I think in the case of your VFR 800, it's obviously not a cheap, but like it wasn't a cheap bike to begin with, and
definitely not.
And on the used market, as you are pointing out, there's some demand there, right? So you ended up you sort of struggled to find one because people like them, they're keeping them, and this is where I would propose that if new bikes become too cheap, then there will be no room for there to be demand for new bikes as they age, And I think that could be a big problem. If you could just buy a brand new motorcycle for so cheap that you would never consider buying a used one, that would be a shame.
Well, I mean, cheap, of course, is relative to what you need and to what you get. So my motorcycle was cheap for what I felt like I was getting, which is obviously why I bought it. I thought it was a bargain. At that stage as a used bike, I thought it was really expensive when it was new and asking MSRP. Right. It certainly wouldn't be a cheap bike for someone else who had a different set of needs.
Well, I think that's the
depends.
point, right? So, like, this conversation actually started. So, for those of you listening, Zack and I were talking the other day, and we were kind of batting this back and forth, and it all kind of started with some of the articles that we've seen on Common Tread. Most recently, Andy Greaser has been testing a KTM Duke 200, which has an MSRP of like $39.99. And then I was like, well, what about just getting like a Z400? And then we started going back on like the price and like the performance. But for somebody like Lance, I don't know exactly what you paid, but I'm guessing you probably paid somewhere between like $6,000 to $8,000 in that range.
$7,000. So you were right there.
Right on the money, Spurg.
So you bought a used bike for $7,000, but
Correct.
knew that bike was like $15,000, $16,000. So the question is, does someone that's just starting off go and buy a $7,000 bike? Probably not, because they don't need a sport touring bike with the deluxe package and all that. But what they might do is they might say, hey, this brand new Z7 or Z400 or Duke 200 for $4,000 or $4,500, that's a great deal. But then I think, and I'm trying to understand, how Zack kind of came at this, where he was like, well, what if a bike then you can get a used, Ninja 400 or Z400 for $2,500 or $3,000? Then do you buy the Duke 200 new versus something that's been used for a little while? So I think that's a big question right now with all of these bikes that are coming out. Some of these prices are getting really affordable, and if you are looking at starting out as a motorcyclist, now's a great time to do it.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess the whole I'll sprinkle, not that we need more variables here, but I'll sprinkle in another facet to the whole conversation around cheap, which is that sometimes as bikes become, in fact, often, as bikes become more affordable, they become crappier as far as build quality and that kind of thing. So part of what my argument here is that if bikes keep on getting cheaper, if you have like a Duke, and I don't know about the build quality on a Duke 200 because I haven't read Andy Greaser's article yet because it hasn't been published yet, but I think it's safe to assume in the world we live in that if bikes keep getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and you can eventually get like a 250cc or a 300cc bike for $1,500, brand new, 17-inch wheels, it'll go 80 miles an hour. If that bike is proportionally crappy to the trends that we have seen, I'm going to find myself wishing that bike didn't exist, because I would rather someone buy a used Z400 or a CB300R or MT-03 or whatever it is, because a used version of that bike would be a better way to start off than something that's just like brand new and has a warranty, but it's made of cheese.
So that was the big debate, when Lance and we had this discussion, because it was probably about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago now. We did the story on the CSC, the SG, the SG 250,
right.
And so many comments were, do I buy this bike new for $2,000? Because it was $2,000, came with a warranty, but it didn't have a dealer support, so you had to do the work yourself. They would send you the parts if something broke. Or do I go out and I get a used Ninja 300 for $2,000? And that's a really hard question, because on one hand, you get a used bike that doesn't have a warranty. You don't know what someone's done to it, and if you're
questionable
just starting,
history.
Yeah, and if you just are starting out, you don't know what to look for. Or do I buy this brand new bike off the dealer floor? And for those of you listening, I'm shrugging right now. That's my. How good is the quality?
Noise. Yeah, how good is the quality?
Well, so the CSC is probably not the greatest example, because it kind of complicates things due to the fact that you don't have the dealer support. But the way I look at it, and why I'm maybe not concerned about the issue that Zack is raising, is that what you want to buy, let's assume the consumer is informed, but what they want to buy depends on their personal situation very much. And there's going to be some people who want to buy a new bike with a warranty. Let's assume it is a bike they're getting from a dealer, and they have that support. Maybe they don't feel comfortable evaluating a used bike. They'd rather have a smaller new bike, say, than a larger or more maybe higher quality used one, because they may live in this, a young person living in a city doesn't have a garage, doesn't have a good place to work on a bike, doesn't have the tools or the expertise or the knowledge or the support from friends or whatever, to be able to maybe keep a used bike going. Maybe for that person, a new bike makes a lot more sense at the same given price point. On the other hand, if you do have that confidence, expertise, the tools, the ability to work on a used bike, you can get into this so cheap. And the perfect example of that is a story I love that we had on Common Tread a couple of years ago by George, a guy who works at RevZilla, who bought a Ninja 500 for around $1,000. Obviously, George has got great skills mechanically. So he rigged it up with a custom-made bracket and a carrier for his dog so he could take dogs for a ride. Then he stripped it down, put good tires on it, took it to a track day at New Jersey Motorsports Park, did that. Then he...
Was the dog in the back when he did
No,
the track
no,
day?
dogs are not allowed at track days. No, don't worry. The dog was not harmed in the making of this article. But then he put knobbies on it and went and did a dual sport run on it and rode through the winter on it with the knobbies on it. So he had $1,000 in this bike and he did all kinds of great stuff with it. So I think he even made a carrier so he could put his bicycle on the back and take his bicycle out with him where he wanted to go riding. So you could do all that for $1,000 if you have those skills, but not everybody does. And some people are going to need a cheap new bike to get into this and have the confidence that they've got some warranty support.
Yeah, it sounds like Uncle Bob would be proud, by the way.
Uncle Bob would be, sure.
Of George's adventures. Yeah, I think that that's sort of fair. But I guess I think that with new bikes, if new bikes become so cheap that no one will want to buy a used bike, then isn't that kind of a shame? Isn't it kind of a shame that it will drive demand down for a used EX500 like you're talking about that George bought, or a used MT-03, or a used VFR for that matter? Isn't it a slippery slope? Don't we think that it would if people will just like throw their motorcycle into a ditch and buy a new one instead of trying to resell it because there's no point?
No,
that's
I
kind
don't.
of a bummer, right?
I just don't think that's going to happen because
you're an optimist.
No, because there are a lot of people who disagree with you on that point. But I work with Spurg and Dunbar on a regular basis. It would be hard to maintain that sort of optimism.
That's true.
But
I am the most optimistic.
So I just don't see that happening, because there are still people like George out there. He's an extreme example, but there's people who are going to want to get the used bike that is going to be maybe a little more capable, a little higher quality, a little more displacement, a little more power, whatever it is that they're after that they need for their particular use. And those people are going to say, okay, I've got $4,000 to spend. I'm not going to buy this new bike for $4,000 when I can get this used bike that's also $4,000 that's more capable. I don't know. I just don't think that's going to happen. And it certainly is not happening in the current environment where used bikes are selling like crazy right now.
Yeah, true enough. These are all great points. I'm trying to stand on my ground here, but your bright, sunny disposition, Lance, is winning.
So let's do this. I think this will be fun, and this is kind of like if anybody's ever read Calvin and Hobbes as a kid, we're taking the Calvin ball approach to this podcast for season 3. So we're going to keep the rules changing as we go along. So I'm going to throw an audible in there. I'm going to ask either of you, Lance, if you had the option to spend $4,000 on a brand new bike or a used bike, what would you do?
Most of the motorcycles I have bought have been 1 or 2 years old used, or in a couple cases a leftover that was new but was also at that point a year or 2 year old. I've always found that was kind of the sweet spot for me in terms of getting the most value.
Quit stalling, Lancey Pants. Quit stalling.
No,
what's the answer?
Well, what I'm saying is I would try to find a recent used bike usually.
Okay, so Lance would go with used. Zach, how about you? New or used?
Sorry, this is for $4,000?
Yeah, $4,000 or $5,000, somewhere in that range. Like, would you go used or would you go new?
I'd absolutely get a used bike. Absolutely. And it could be, like Lance said, because the infrastructure I have in my life, my good friend lives a couple blocks away and has a tire changer. And
your good friend is also Ari Henning that correct. Can fix anything.
So yeah, but I mean, even that not being the case, I would buy a used bike because I feel like that's where the value is. I feel like you can get more for your money in that situation. So perhaps Lance is turning my own feelings against me here. Like if I would buy a used bike with my $4,000, ipso facto, we've got nothing to worry about new bikes driving prices down or driving demand down, because this is the way of the world.
Time out. So here's the deal. So I'm gonna.
What about? Hang on. Hold on, Spurg and Dunbar. What would you do with your $4,000?
I was gonna actually guess. Thank you for asking me, because I was actually gonna volunteer that. But the fact that you turned it in the form of a question is fantastic. I would go used as well.
Right. Of course you would.
But here's the deal. I'm looking at this podcast, and it's folks that are probably 10 plus years of experience riding. In Lance's case, I mean, 55 to 60 years plus riding experience. And so for those of you listening on the podcast and you can't tell, Lance is a very old man. We call him the Silver Fox.
His years of riding basically just put me when I was riding in my mother's womb.
Which is probably the case. I mean, your mom is the one that got you into riding motorcycles. So if you didn't listen to the interview that we actually did in season 2 of Highside, Lowside, we actually interview Lance, and he talks about the fact that his mom was actually the one that got him into riding bikes. But my point in this is that we're all experienced riders. We've all got years of riding. So I think that for us, we look at $4,000 or $5,000, and it's like, okay, cool. I'm on the verge of being able to buy, I can get a used, Speed Triple. I can get a used Speed Triple for like $5,000. I can get a 2010 Speed Triple for $5,000. So I think like you see the value of being able to buy a lot more. I think if you are just starting out in this, you don't need to get a big displacement motorcycle. You don't need the deluxe package of a bygone model that has hard bags included. You can just say, hey, I'm really just looking for an around town, $4,000, $400. What do you have for me? And that's where I think Zack's argument actually makes more sense, from the standpoint of like maybe that is going to chip away at the new segment. Now, before I let Zack talk, because I can see him over here, he's ready to pounce. Hang on. We have. I do want to read this comment from Richard Clark, and Richard says most of this has, and this is on the first look of the KTM 200 Duke. He says, most of this has to do with price point, as the best that I can see it. I don't doubt that it would be a nice beginner bike or a capable around town street use bike, but there are a tremendous number of choices to be had in that particular range. And when you consider how many miles overall this thing is going to be used for, perhaps a used bike is a much stronger argument. So that is a point that I think we have to be making, because, you had said something earlier about the reliability. For most first bikes, I mean, are they really being used a tremendous amount of miles, or is it just like, hey, I just want to get something to, put a few hundred miles under my belt? In which case, how does that argument play out?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, you add a lot of variables, right? Like making assumptions about how much people are going to ride and that kind of thing. I don't know. I guess it would go back to my original, or one of my foundational pieces of advice for people buying an affordable machine, whether it's because they only have a certain amount of money, or it's because they're new to riding, or both, or whatever it is to get one that already has scratches on it, because you will, you're more likely in those situations in general to tip the bike over, and you don't want to be sad that you just scratched your new Ducati Super Sport or whatever. You'd much rather tip over a Ninja 650 that someone else has already tipped over, So yeah, I guess that's very broad advice, but that's also a broad question to try to answer, right? Like, how much do we think they'd be riding it, and what should they spend their money on? So I don't know. If anyone disagrees with that, please feel free to shoot me down.
No, I agree 100%, and that's advice that I always give people too. You want to, if you're starting off for your first bike and you ask me what to buy, I say get something small and manageable. Get something that's used. And for not only for the reason of, you might tip it over and you're going to cry a lot less if it's something that's already scratched, but not only that, but when you're starting out, you may have this vision of what you're going to do as a motorcyclist. Maybe you dream of crossing the country or whatever, and you find out that what you really enjoy is something totally else that you didn't know, because you had no experience and you didn't know what you like and what you don't like until you actually try it.
Totally. So in that case, you don't want to finance.
You don't want to spend a bunch of money. Yeah.
Totally. Yep.
You don't want. You want to be able, your first motorcycle should be your last motorcycle, hopefully. So it's just the first one to get you started.
So that's actually a really good point. Is I think a lot of people are afraid of that. They're like, well, I don't want to buy the wrong bike. I'm like, right. There's so many different.
You're not
bikes
getting
out
married.
There. Yeah.
You're not getting married. You're just buying a motorcycle. You can sell them. It won't have its feelings hurt if you sell it to somebody else.
I mean, you could argue the divorce rate in this country, Lance. I mean, you could get divorced too. If you get the wrong woman, you can get divorced.
But you don't have to pay alimony if you sell a motorcycle.
Easy now. This is another great bumper sticker or T-shirt for Highside, Lowside, as far as I'm concerned. Buy the wrong bike. Do it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Buy the wrong bike. Why not?
You'll learn what you like and what you don't like, and you'll make a better choice the next time. Exactly. It's all a learning process.
The wisdom that pours out of your mouth, Lance, is unbelievable.
But so to get back to your other point, that's why I don't really see a problem, because we're saying for the three of us who are experienced motorcycles, we're going to buy a used bike with a given X amount of dollars. And maybe for a lot of new riders, I would say again, buy a used bike. Don't spend a lot of money. See what you like and what you don't like about motorcycling, and then go out and buy your second bike. Let your second or third bike be what you really, really want to own. But I do recognize that there is that consumer out there, perhaps, like I say, a person who lives in the city, doesn't have a garage, can't necessarily work on a used bike, may not have a lot of experience, doesn't have Ari Henning living just down the street with a fully equipped garage to repair things for.
All right. Yeah.
and they may need a KTM Duke 200. They may need the security of a new motorcycle that they can ride around town. And so I'm not saying that in every case you should do what we do, which is go out and spend your money on a used motorcycle. I think there's times when it makes sense for even a relatively new rider, maybe not as a first bike, but for a lot of people, those small, inexpensive bikes that are new make sense. And so it's great that we have all the choices.
I just don't think that you're going to see. To Zach's point, I don't think you're going to see all of these $1,500 to $2,500, motorcycles that are kind of flooding the market from other countries, really upset the balance of the big four, right? Like, I would still say the big four. When I say that, I'm talking about Yamaha, Suzuki, Kawasaki, and Honda. They've got the most selection for beginners at the right price. Yes, you could look at something like a Duke 200 or 390, but really when you're looking at Kawasaki's lineup or Suzuki's lineup or Yamaha or Honda, they've got a great selection of reputable bikes. Most of them come with a 2-year warranty, and they've got years and years of experience behind them. So I think for the average person looking at that as their new bike, as their first bike, you're going to be able to do a world with it, and like the thing about like something like a Z400, right? Or an MT-03, you can buy that bike, and if you decide you want to take it on a long distance trip, you can throw saddlebags on it. It's not going to be the most comfortable thing in the world, but like you can do it. And if you're just starting off in motorcycling, that's half the fun, is the discovery process of like, what do I like doing? And at the same time, the flip side of that is if you decide that you want to go do your first track day, you can take a Z400 to the track and you can have a ball on it. Like, you can do all this different stuff. Or maybe you realize that like, hey, I don't like going fast. I just like cruising around town. And then your second bike ends up being, a 883 Sportster or something along those lines. I think it can go in different directions, but I think you guys are both absolutely correct that like, just pull the trigger on something and then figure it out after the fact, like, I'm all for that.
Buy a motorcycle now. Explain it to yourself later. That's another great bumper sticker T-shirt. We're coming up with coming up with T-shirts left and right here. It's really remarkable. So one just quick counterpoint, and then I'll move on. The whole it's not going to upset the Japanese Big Four. Don't you think there were people in the 60s and 70s who said, Nissan, Datsun, Toyota? No, are you kidding me? No one will ever purchase those machines instead of a fine-built Ford or Chevrolet. I mean, right? And then some time down the road here, and Ford and Chevy are not out of business yet.
But I think the difference that you're seeing here is a global economy that didn't exist in the 50s and 60s the way it exists now. Most of these manufacturers are sharing manufacturing plants, right?
Yeah,
Most of these manufacturers have joint partnerships with low-dollar manufacturing plants in these countries, so that if you buy I don't know, a CSC, for example, like there's the chances are that a lot of the parts are being manufactured for a Honda in the same plant that is being manufactured for some of these other motorcycles. So I think that might offset things a little bit.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like I could keep on talking about this, but I feel like we've come to a decent conclusion, have we not? That it is based on the person and what they need. But I would still argue we should be wary of purchasing something because it is new and not considering something that is higher quality but used for the same price. And maybe it's just my position, but I want people to take that away.
Yeah, I think that's for most people. I would say that's true. Yeah, I think we all agree that for most people it does make more sense to buy used.
I was going to make a point. I was going to tie this around to an analogy with guitars too, but it's the same thing. It's like, do you buy something that's like 10 years old that might have? I remember reading in the book the one time. It's like, do you buy like a reputable Fender Telecaster that has a little like Donald Duck painted on it and like that? You make that your first guitar. Or do you go buy like some fancy new showroom window thing from a non-reputable brand? And 9 times out of 10, you're better off with a used product from a reputable brand than a brand that you just don't know anything about.
We're dropping knowledge about guitars now. I mean, it's very, very impressive. Well, so I think that Lance has donated enough of his wisdom for one podcast. Would you agree, Spurgeon?
I think it's time to bid Lance adieu. But for those of you listening, I want you to all hang out because Zack and I are now going to go into listeners' comments.
Lance Oliver, consummate professional. I likes me some Lancey pants. So now, Spurgeon Dunbar, we are jumping into I forget what we're calling it. We're calling it Highside Lowside comments and questions.
We can call it whatever you want, man. We can call it whatever you want. What do you want to call it?
This is different. This is different than the comments that we usually pull from either from Common Tread or I don't know where else. But this is specific to the podcast.
Yeah, if a lot of times when you hear like what Zack and I were just doing, we were talking with Lance, obviously, and a lot of the conversation spurns from Common Tread articles. So we were actually getting some people that had weighed in on the Common Tread article topics that we've talked about. Right. What we're doing now is these are the responses that you have put on previous episodes of Highside Lowside. You have either left us a comment on YouTube or you have written an email into us at highsidelowside@RevZilla.com. Both are very acceptable ways to leave feedback. So please make sure you throw feedback out to us. We want to hear exactly what you're thinking, or maybe you just want to weigh in with your thoughts on cheap motorcycles versus used motorcycles,
which will be the topic for every podcast going forward. Just kidding. But on the topic of feedback, our first Highside Lowside comment is from Patrick, who sent us an email, and I'm very excited about this feedback and to discuss it. Patrick says, "Hi team, just wanted to stop by and say, damn, that increase in production value in season 2, so well made. Congrats and best of luck going forward." So Patrick, what I would like to do right now is issue a formal apology from everyone at RevZilla that increase in production value is absolutely out the window for season 3.
Out the window. So for season 3, we brought it back to the basics. There's practically no production value here whatsoever.
And so from me, Zack Kortz, and all of the RevZilla team, I'm so sorry, Patrick, that the production value has gone down again. But we hope that the topics are entertaining and you're getting a kick out of watching and listening to us.
He's going to tune in for season 3. He's like, what the hell happened? Exactly. I left them a comment.
We see you, Patrick. We see you, and we're sorry.
All right, so moving on from Patrick, this comes from Angus. I like to think that this is Angus Young from AC/DC writing in to tell us that he is as much a fan of us as I am of him. This is Highside Lowside comment number 2, an email coming in regarding the episode Annoying Things Motorcyclists Do from season 2, episode 11. And Angus says, "Hey guys, love your podcast and the banter. So what are your thoughts on group rides? I like the community and getting to know other riders, but I hate group rides. I only like to ride with like 1 or 2 friends max."
Word, Angus. And I think this is a topic of a whole podcast by itself, frankly.
You keep saying that, but we have to give Angus at least a little bit of a amuse-bouche of two.
It's true.
Let's say we were going to talk about this in a whole podcast. Let's at least start the conversation right now, and then we can refer back to it. So
we'll get it.
What about you? Like, do you enjoy group rides?
I was just talking about this with Ari the other day because we were riding. We were riding back from CTXP episode 3 actually, and we were, I guess, technically on a group ride, the two of us, and we go back a long way. We've been riding motorcycles together since we were kids. We have a similar amount of capability and skill, and we have sort of similar taste in the way that we want to ride, and so it's very easy. And I think that in that situation, it's easy for me to think, wow, this would just be more fun if there were more people. The more, the merrier. But I do think, in general, that riding with one or two friends max is the right idea, Angus. I think you're on the right track. And I don't like riding with large groups of people because every time you add a person, you add a variable, you add someone who's more likely to take off their helmet for a little bit longer than you want them to at a gas station, or you just don't know their background, you don't know their skill set, you don't know how fast they're comfortable riding. People can get in over their head. It complicates things exponentially every time you add one rider to a ride. So I think in general, be very discerning about who you ride with and why you ride with them. And that isn't to say you should exclude people, but just if you're going to enjoy yourself more with fewer people, then do that. Do that.
I agree. I think that I've definitely, when I was starting out especially, done the group ride thing and like tried to hang out with big groups of people. And more often than not, I found 2 or 3 people within that group that I would ride with because those are the people that we were similarly set for like how fast we wanted to go.
Similarly slow, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Very slow. Yeah, a nice low-level pace. Unless you go and spend a bunch of money on expensive suspension, and it just pushes you up over the top. You got to bring it back around.
And scene.
But no, like I think on the street, you ride with people that you don't know, and you can easily get in over your head, or you can have somebody else that gets in over their head, and then all of a sudden they go down or something happens and it ends up ruining a day. So I do like to ride with a small group of people that I know their riding ability, and that goes the same for off-road too. I think, Zach, you made a really good comment of you don't know how long somebody wants to take their helmet off for. I don't like to take long rests. If I'm on a ride, I want to get back to it. Let's have fun. Sure. So if I'm on the street, it's like stop, use the bathroom at the gas station, grab a snack, eat a snack, fill up your gas tank, and keep going. I've ridden with people already. They just every hour they want to stop at a restaurant or somewhere and walk around, and I'm like, that's not my speed. If I'm doing that, it's not fun for me. So
that's not what Saturdays are for.
Exactly. No, but everybody's different. There are people who like to do the restaurant to cafe ride or whatever it is that they're doing, and they like to make those stops. I like to see how many miles I can pack in and how much fun I can have. So I think you make a good point. If you are going to do a group ride, have the conversations ahead of time. Let people know to ride their own bike, right? Like, you ride your speed, I'll ride my speed. And if you're faster, wait for me at the stop sign. Or if I'm faster, I'll wait for you at the stop sign. But don't try and keep up with somebody. And then, like, how often do you want to stop? Have those conversations ahead of time so that you're getting ahead of it, basically.
Sure. And that actually, the last thing that Angus said in his comment was, I feel bad when random people say, let's do a ride, and I say no. And that's fair, right? Because you don't want to be exclusive. You don't want to be like, nah, man, or I don't want to ride with you because you're slow, or I don't want to ride with you. And they'll think it's because they smell funny or they're a girl or whatever. And that's not fair. You don't want to do that. So what I would say about that is, to Spurgeon's point, if someone's a different style of rider, then meet up at a cafe, meet up somewhere where you can hang out and talk bikes, because that's probably still fun. But you don't necessarily spend time riding together. I think there are ways you can work around that as sort of you get to be inclusive and hang out with people and sort of be enthusiasts together without actually having to ride together.
Yeah, I think, and honestly, like, I've stopped feeling bad about it. Like, my advice to you, Angus, is to stop.
But that's because you're a big famous podcaster.
Yes, that's the world that I'm living in. No, but I think with like going to a lot of dual sport events or off-road events, like there's always somebody like, hey, can I join your group? And it's like, I've already got 10 people, and like if you're trying to get 10 people on an off-road group through a 100-mile day, like you're always going to have somebody at the back, somebody at the front. It's always going to be lagging. And then when you start to get above that number, it's just too many people to keep track of. It's too many people to help pick up. Like, I think you have to figure out what's your comfortable number of people that you want to ride with, and then, you know, just be honest and say, hey, like, this is the group that I have. Like, I'm kind of maxed out here already. Like, but like you said, let's meet at the cafe, or like, hey, we're going to do this, you know, we'll see you at the next stop, or whatever it ends up being.
Yeah, it certainly feels like, and that's very broad advice, right? Like, just be nice to people and try to hang out with them anyway, which is frankly not super easy to do sometimes. But I feel like Angus is on the right track, is being empathetic, and I think that's what most of us should try to do, is try to be inclusive when possible.
Yeah, joking aside, like I in one breath, I'm like, yeah, I've don't feel bad about it, but I'm also the one that's like constantly bringing, you know, the stray cats into our group ride, where I'm like, hey, I found this guy over there by himself, and like, he's going to join us. And they're like, why would you, like, you don't know anything about that guy? And I'm like, yeah, but he was all by himself and he wants to come ride. So I am very guilty of including people. And I think that's why I've been burned in the past too, where like I brought some people into the group, and like, it's turned out to be a bad decision for a variety of reasons. But anyway, I think you're right. This is a we obviously could keep going on this topic.
Yes.
So Angus,
arguably gone too far already.
Yeah.
And at this point we should thank Angus for the question, because this is useful and a good thing to talk about, good thing for people to consider about group rides. And maybe, who knows, maybe we'll come back to it and talk about another podcast. And it's a great segue for people leaving questions, comments, and concerns on the YouTube link, or of course shoot an email to Highside, Lowside at RevZilla.com.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to be like Angus, send an email, leave a comment, and we might pick you to banter back and forth all about. And the other thing to keep in mind is that if you want your chance to win that free t-shirt, make sure you leave us a review on Apple iTunes. That is the number one place to leave a review. We check them, and we'll be pulling out random people at large. Again, this week's winner was, I don't even have it here. I'm throwing my
Derek.
papers all
Wasn't
around.
it
Derek, thank you. Derek Brown, make sure to shoot us an email. You want a free t-shirt. And that's going to do it for our first episode of Season 3. Leave us feedback. Let us know how you like this lower quality version. And again, we apologize to you, Patrick, for, you know, bringing it down from Season 2.
Indeed. Yeah, we hope that you can tolerate this, and your feedback and suggestions will be very welcome. And hopefully Season 3 will get going, and we'll have fun with this, and we'll keep talking about bikes. Thank you so much for watching, for listening, however you find your Highside, Lowside podcast. And for Spurg, I'm Zack. We'll see you next time.
Cheers.